I'm Casey Calvert.
I'm Leanna Lovings.
I'm Corey Chase.
I'm Bree Mills, and you're listening to the Adult Time Podcast. So, Quiver Queen, tell me about a little bit about, before you became known officially as the Quiver Queen. What was your upbringing like? Tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah. So I moved not a lot, but I did a very drastic move when I was younger. So I grew up mainly in Jacksonville, Florida, in a very ghetto suburban area. And then when I was 13, we moved to Alaska.
Wow.
So a very polar opposite. And so I went to high school there in a little bit, graduated, spent some of my adult years, my first job and stuff. So before I got into the industry, I was actually in nursing. And then my kind of gateway into adult things was I did this bikini barista job for a little while, which just kind of got me more comfortable with myself. Because in Alaska, you wear a lot of clothes. So, you know, when you get naked, you're kind of the lights are off. But no, that kind of led me into starting into sex work. And then I my OnlyFans into porn.
So what were some of the biggest juxtapositions between life in Florida versus life in Alaska?
I think a lot of it just had to do with the way people are and the environment that I was in. It was a very, I don't want to say kill or be killed, but it was it's more of a fight for survival in that type of area. A lot of the people that I grew up with did not make it past their teenage years, and just got sucked into pretty terrible things. So I do think that my mom pulled me out of that environment at a very good time because I was going down a not so good path. And so then going to Alaska where it was okay, now I don't have all these social pressures, dangers, and things like that I have to worry about. I can focus on being a kid and figuring out what I'm going to do when I decide to jump into my adult life. So I do think that Alaska saved me and in a sense of it put me in a position where I could make my own decision. I do think that either way, I probably would have found myself in porn. I just think it would have been a different go around, and maybe I wouldn't have been in the best place when I got in.
Yeah. What was so you mentioned that you were in high school in Alaska. What was the environment like, through adolescence and leading up to that first job you ended up the job you ended up having as the bikini barista?
So I went to a very, my town was a mile long, a very small school. I think my graduating class was actually 30 kids. So I kind of just showed up for an hour and then left, for graduation. But I really only went to high school for 2 years, and then I graduated early and I left home at 15. So I moved 3 hours away from where my family was staying. And that's when I got the opportunity to take a management job at, I think I was 17 at this point, at a skilled nursing facility. And then I ended up actually being assistant administrator for that. So I did that for a half a year before I decided to start working on the floor with patients. And then I was probably in healthcare a total of 2.5 years. I had my CNA certification. I had started going to nursing school. I wanted to be an NP, which is a nurse practitioner. But COVID ruined healthcare. It pretty much ruined it. And I like got in because I loved taking care of people, and it was no longer about caring for people. I mean, healthcare had kind of always been about like the money in the sense, you know, of the way that hospitals act. But when COVID came, it really just took it the rest of the way. There was no more, like, we didn't care about the patients. So I quit. And then the fun thing I decided to do, you know, after like, you know, trying to go to school and do what everyone else thought was a good idea and was like a pristine career. Then I like got into the bikini barista, which was actually like my boyfriend at the time's idea, which helped me to like open up, feel comfortable in my own body, like have fun. I made really good tips, drank a lot of coffee, got frostbite on my ass. But other than that, like that was a very good point in my life for like learning myself and becoming comfortable before transitioning.
Would you say that like your interest in nursing was to help others, and then you just sort of discovered through the barista job and then obviously getting into other forms of sex work that it was sort of equally interesting to focus on yourself?
I think the biggest thing for me was like growing up, especially being the new kid from Florida who like I got bullied a lot when I got to Alaska. Like they don't really like outsiders coming in. Because they're a very close-knit group of kids. But I think for me, it was mainly just like, I did it for myself. Like it was the first time in my life where I didn't, like, because when I got into nursing, it wasn't necessarily, I loved what I did, But I did it more or less for people to be proud of me.
Yeah.
To have something. Because, I didn't come from a family that was going to be, I was the first one to graduate high school, first one to go to college. So like I was trying to set an example for like my younger sibling. But when I got into like the industry and the sex work things, it was more of like, I don't really care if anyone like says that this isn't cool or this is wrong or it's raunchy. Like I'm doing this because it makes me happy. And like at the end of the day, I pay my own bills and I live with myself. So like your opinion doesn't matter. Yeah. So yeah, I think for me, it was like the transition was more of like doing something that other people wanted me to do to doing something that was just for me.
What are some of your kind of earliest memories about your own sexuality?
I wasn't really a sexual person. I think that I always thought of sex a lot. I was very curious, but like I lost my virginity at a very like older age compared to most. I wasn't sexually active, up until like late of my high school and like transitioning into like 18 and things like that. But I think like movies, my mom used to watch a lot of True Blood, and that was like some of my first experiences of like seeing naked bodies and like the softcore side of things that are in movies. And so I remember we'd watch the episodes together and I'd say like, oh no, I just want to watch the vampires. Like I just love the show. When in reality, every time they had me cover my eyes, I just wanted to like peek and like see what was going on. And
that's one of my favorite questions to ask is like those early pop culture media references, because I think it's so telling, right? So so what was it about seeing the sexuality on True Blood that spoke to you? Was it just the fact that it was the first time you saw kind of that type of sexuality?
I don't think it was necessarily just because it was the first time. I think honestly, because now looking back into like what I'm into in my adult life, it was like probably that it was more aggressive and like when I masturbate, I like to watch like Vikings shows, like with like murder and very aggressive things are happening. So I'm like, I think that was the beginning for me. Yeah. Like we're watching True Blood and now we're like into much darker things.
Yes. Okay. We're going to get back to the Vikings a bit later. But do you kind of have, like, what's your earliest memory of masturbation? Was this something that you sort of always remember doing? Or like you mentioned, did it something you discovered later on in your life?
Yeah, I think it was something I discovered later. I just kind of like got curious, slowly touching myself. I remember one time I stole a back massager from my parents to use for other things. And that was like my first vibration experience. Yeah. I was like, oh, this is not a back massager. So probably that, just like slow curiosity leading in. But like I always kind of knew, my parents were very open. Like there was nothing that they like tried to hide from us. So everything was always easily accessible to kind of learn about.
What was sort of sex education like in your upbringing? I know there's like a real lack of it socially.
It was terrible. I actually didn't get my like real legit sex education class until I moved to Alaska, which by that age, like a lot of my peers were already having sex and were sexually active, especially in the environment like where I grew up in my earlier upbringing. I think my brother taught me the most, like not in like a weird way, but like I spent like maybe 4 days out of the month with him because it was split custody, and like he was 2 years older than me, so he was going through everything before I would. And I remember him telling me things like, if you just want a boyfriend, like you just gotta dress like a slut, like, and I'm like, that's not a good advice.
But maybe it's telling to the importance of sex education.
That is what young men want. So like in the sense of like I always knew like what the guys were like into because I could tell from what my brother was doing. So and he had friends.